I study work and I study employment. And so I look at the kinds of jobs that people have, who gets access to what kinds of jobs, look at the conditions and the terms of those jobs in great detail, and in general, look at the work piece of it. It's more than income. It is about what happens in people's lives when they don't have a lot of money. So one thing that I've seen a lot of this in our discipline in the last few years is looking at the fact that people who are poor, whether they're part of the working poor or they're unemployed, are often a paycheck away from crisis, and that a car that breaks down, or a child that gets sick, or a family that gets evicted can suddenly be plunged into extremely dire circumstances. Many low-wage jobs are part-time. The hours are very unpredictable. People have to often piece together multiple jobs just in order to survive. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in their scheduling, and this has become a big problem, or at least a lot more people are talking about it recently. You have to be available to go in if needed, and that has to do with the way that a lot of firms try to reduce their labor costs by only having people on the payroll when they absolutely need them. And so somebody like that who is required to be on call has very little flexibility to accept other jobs in order to maximize her or his earnings. Even if you work full-time as a low-wage worker, you don't earn an above poverty level wage. And most of these jobs aren't full-time anyway. So there is a trap. It's very hard to go to school, and it's very hard to carve out the hours to study when you're constantly thinking about where your next paycheck is going to come in, and when you might have to be piecing together a lot of different jobs just to survive. One is to increase the minimum wage, and that a number of cities have adopted the policy already. So there's a trend. It may be really increasing widely. It's under discussion here in Davis, in fact. We've seen companies like Walmart, which is, has a long history of being a very low wage employer, starting to say that they're going to raise their entry-level wages for workers as well. And so that's a very heartening development. Some cities are looking at policies to require that employers guarantee scheduling. Of course, the earned income tax credit has been very valuable to many low-wage workers. It's somewhat of a mixed bag, but that it has been helpful in the policy world, and I think a lot of people recognize that now. I think we often forget about this issue when we live in a community like Davis, where we're fairly insulated. Economically, we're not a very homogeneous town, and so we forget that there are a huge number of people who are poor, and that the extent of poverty in our country is quite severe. But even though we may not live with it every day, we read about it in the newspapers, we read about it on social media. Headline-grabbing news often revolves around the circumstances that poor people have to live under, and it does affect us all, or it should anyway, because it is our society, it's the greater good, and it's hard to live a good life and feel like things are okay in our country when we know that so many people don't have these things.